Hi there. Today I'm going to be starting a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to play the game Battle Lines, the Stalingrad campaign, slightly differently from what I'm used to playing it. Now, when I first started playing the game, I just had the first set, Drive on Stalingrad. And the standard way of playing a set is you play an operation, which means you play a number of missions to 100 victory points using the two decks in that set. So, for example, you have the 9th Panzer Division and the 18th Tank Corps in the Drive on Stalingrad. So you use those two decks, they fight against each other, and whoever wins the operation wins the game. Now, so that's just a standard two-player game. It is possible to play the game with 4 or even 6 players. I guess you could try more, but it might get quite unwieldy. But to do that, you really need separate decks, other sets, because in each set you get a deck for each side. And what you do when you play multiplayer is you will play 2 or 3, if it's 6-player, missions side by side, and they have linking locations, but otherwise you will have you're each playing your own mission, so you can pass certain cards across, and certain formations can cross to other missions in certain locations. So for that kind of play, essentially you would need more decks. So for 4-player you really need 2 sets, for 6-player you really need 3 sets. Otherwise, what you'll find is that if you only have one deck, and say you have one deck each side, and you have 4 players, so 2 players are sharing a deck, the deck's going to be burnt through very quickly, and the mission will probably end before either player can complete their mission. Now, there's certain rules for deciding, if you're playing with 4 players and one side wins one mission, the other side wins the other mission, how you work it out, and so forth. But that's another way of playing. Then the third sort of main way of playing is if you have all 4 of the sets, you play a campaign. And with the campaign, you will start with Drive on Stalingrad, you'll play an operation, then you'll move on to Streets of Stalingrad, play an operation, Operation Uranus, and then Winter Storm. And so you'll perform 4 operations, which might mean between, say, 10 and 12 missions are played out. Now, if you're fortunate to have an upper echelon set, that means you have extra sets on each side to reinforce the decks as they are playing these missions. So you basically sort of get bumper cards as well as more formations and tactical options and things like that. So but generally what you'll be doing is you'll be using the decks, so the corps and divisions from this set for that mission, and then the decks from this set for that for those missions, that operation, and likewise with these. So doing it that fashion, which I've just done, means that once you've finished the Drive on Stalingrad operation, you will retire the 9th Panzer Division, and you'll get a new division for Streets of Stalingrad. Now what that means is that you always get a fresh deck, and you're never really in danger of running out of enough formations to perform a mission. Now there's an optional campaign which they offer, and this is what I'm going to be doing now, is that you will take just one deck through the whole campaign. So for example, I'm going to be taking the 9th Panzer Division from the Drive on Stalingrad set through the whole campaign. So I won't use any of the divisions or corps listed in here. And likewise, the 18th Tank Corps will be their opponent through the whole campaign. So it might not be completely historical, but it is at least plausible. But that they would meet each other. There might have missions in between where they didn't and they fought other ones. We don't see those. But effectively what that does, and it's going to make it very interesting, is that this deck is all I have. So if units are destroyed from this, then that's it. I don't have them for the rest of the campaign. It also means that Normally, when you play a mission, certain units are not destroyed, but they're withdrawn, maybe with a certain number of hits on them. At the end of a mission, they cannot come back, but at the end of an operation, they will. So normally what we saw is certain units being withdrawn throughout the operation, but you always had enough formations left to sort of bolster, maybe not your best, so there was some risk involved, but you really had enough to perform the whole operation. So here we're going to see that. So units that are withdrawn can come back in the operation. So for one operation, I might be at a more depleted deck, but then certain units, certain formations will come back refitted and with replacements added for the next part of the campaign. So there's going to be a sort of a to and fro in what formations I have in my deck. The other thing is, because I have the upper echelon, I'm allowed to have, in this optional one upper echelon headquarters. In the upper echelon set, you get 2 headquarters decks for each side. I've chosen 1 for each, and so that one is going to follow this play deck, the Panzer Division, the Tank Corps, through the whole campaign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it as a 2-player. So I've only got these 2 decks for the whole campaign. Now, because you also get extra decks in the upper echelon, so for example there's 184th Infantry Division and the 192nd Mountain Rifle Division there, and also extra decks in here, it kind of cries out to be played multiplayer. So one could do the same thing, whereby if it was 4-player, I would have 2 decks each side through the whole campaign. 6-player, I would have 3 decks each side through the whole campaign. And that would make it even more realistic, because then I might find that for Streets of Stalingrad, I'm using, say, an infantry division and keeping the Panzer Division in reserve. Whereas in the drive on Stalingrad, my Panzer Division is going to be to the fore and the infantry divisions will be bringing up in the reserve. But that's not what I'm going to do now, because that would be the next step up. I've never done this campaign with just 1 deck. I've only played the whole campaign once, because this has been my kind of like a grail game for me, because I got this set to start with, and then it took a long time to get one other set, which for me was Operation Uranus. I really wanted Streets of Stalingrad, but it was hard to find, because generally what happened is that I think people bought the whole lot as a bundle, and then they were offering it for sale as a bundle, so it was quite expensive to buy, and I was looking for singles. In the end, what I did do when I actually had the money available was I brought another whole set, and then I sold on the ones that I already had. So now I've got the complete set. This is the first time I played the whole campaign, and it was great fun with the using the campaign, but I did feel there was something missing. When you play, if you have a single set and you're just playing operations as a 2-player game, again, that although I really liked the game and I kept coming back to it, I felt there was something missing. And I think it is that this game really shines either as multiplayer or in this campaign format, whereby what I found was that there was always enough here to perform a mission, and sometimes what would happen was that due to lucky draw, one side would win the operation quite easily and the other side wouldn't have much of a chance. So there are sort of questions about play balance in that. Now that would be mitigated if, say, you play multiplayer, because if you have 2 players, one might be winning handily and the other not, might be struggling, and so you might be handily winning and find you have to help your opponent, your fellow player, which then helps your opponent, to sort of recover from the losses he was making. The other thing is that at playing a campaign, there's a bit of a mitigation, because you're playing a lot of missions. If you're lucky on a couple of missions and win Operation handily, you might not be so lucky the next. Your opponent might, so it balances out kind of in that way. But still, in the campaign, I did feel something was missing, and because every operation I was using a new deck, so I had fresh troops, and so I was making the same kind of selections each time. What are the best combinations in this deck? What can I add to it to max it out? And then it just, so both sides were kind of maxed out to the best ability using the upper echelons. And then it just really came down to, I mean, there were some very tense games, but then there were some other tense games that lasted a long time, were kind of seesaws, but then there were some others that just came down to whoever drew one kind of high-powered card before the other, which gave a lot of orders, and they managed to gain the objective before the other fella had a chance to reply. So even in that, I felt there was something not quite satisfying in that. And it is that the gameplay is wonderful. I think it's a fantastically designed game. It's full of like flavour and like historical details, but due to it being a card game, often it comes down to a lucky draw, and that's okay when you're playing a number of hands if you play over a time. But in the terms of one operation, you're maybe only playing what we could call 2, maybe 3 hands. That's not really enough to balance out a lucky draw. So there's another way you could play it, and one is if you only have one set, what you can do is instead of playing an operation to 100 victory points, you could play it to 200 or even 300, and that's easily done because in each set there are 8 missions. So as a 2-player, you're only ever playing 2 or maybe 3 of those per operation, per game, we could say. Which means there's a lot of, either you have a lot of variability, with different missions each time you play the game, or you could play, for example, all 8 operations, or play up to 200, 300, whatever victory points, using just the one deck, and that way you're going to get a mini campaign. And this is essentially going to be the same as that, because I will be playing up to 10, maybe 8, maybe up to 12 maybe, or even more, but probably about 8 to 10 missions. Only mine's going to be slightly different because I'm going through, we're going to get different types of terrain, like Stalingrad is not good terrain for armour, and it's very high on defensive terrain. And you've got the east bank of the Volga with artillery support and so forth. And, other different terrain here, like favouring one side or the other on the whole. So you're going to get that difference. But also with the upper echelons, I've got something to add in, so that although each deck is going to get depleted as we go through, I am able to add in the upper echelons to mitigate that. Then the other thing which is going to be different if you only had one set is you have campaign cards. Now the campaign cards are a great little addition to the campaign game. Essentially what you have is you have a set for each side, and you have one card for each operation. So for the Drive on Stalingrad operation, it's worth 10 campaign victory points. So you're playing to 100 victory points for the winner of the operation, but after that, the winner of that operation gets 10 campaign victory points. And then the winner of the campaign is the one who gets the most victory points. What we see is that the victory points increase as we go through the set. So Streets of Stalingrad, Operation Uranus, and then Winter Storm. And what this means is that, say if you win the first 2 operations, and your opponent wins the third, then you are balanced on victory points, and so it's all down to the last one. If you win the first 3 operations, there's no way your opponent can beat you on the last one, so you get that as a given. You've won the whole campaign. But it's not quite as simple as that either, because there's some extra wrinkles added in. You'll see you have, the first one is you have a campaign mission end rule. So there's a special rule here. So at the end of each mission within this operation, now that might only be 1, because on the second one it's over and this doesn't count. If you go to 3 missions, then you'd get a chance to play this twice. You get a chance to perform what it says, which is effectively doing stuff like bringing in withdrawn units and so forth, or swapping a card out of your eliminated or withdrawn for another card and giving that card to your opponent. So for example, if you have withdrawn units with results cards with it, like one of those results cards you really need because it's got a high level leader or an airstrike that you think you're going to need on there, and you can't bring it out for the next mission, you can play this text slightly different for each operation and perform that kind of procedure. Then the other thing is they have the campaign special rule. Now this is especially great. What it means is if you win the first operation and you get these 10 victory points, then you go on to the second. Maybe say you find you've won the second. Okay, good. Now you're playing for the third, but it looks like you're going to lose this operation. Now what you can do is you can give your opponent either this card or this card. So you can give them 10 or 15 victory points which you've already won. That's theirs to count towards the campaign, but you're giving it in the hope of winning 25, or you might do the 15 in the hope of winning 25 and retain the 10. So you might say, well, yeah, okay, I've given them 15, but and I'd stay with 10, but I think if I give them the 15, I can get the 25, so that leaves me with 35. And then again, we're playing all for the end. And what does it mean giving them this card? Well, you give this card and then it's the same for each side. So in this case, the Axis player surrenders a card, then the Soviet player can count the victory points. The Axis player can take any 5 cards from the Soviet discard pile and place it at the top of the deck. So you do that at any point in a mission, and what it means is you can reorder your opponent's deck so you know what numbers he has coming up, and therefore you can tell more or less how he's able to respond to what you're next doing. So that's worth it. If you think you're about to lose, or if you definitely need to win and it's in the balance, you would spend those campaign victory points and try and secure your victory or give yourself a bit more time. Then there's another special rule here, different one, and another one here, different one. You don't get one for the last one, of course, because it's all over at that point. So you see, it adds slight twists to it. And again, if you're playing multiplayer, this would affect all of the players. But as just two player, it could have very interesting effects and mitigate some of the balance. Whereby if one's winning handily and you have a victory already, a campaign victory, you just say, okay, I'm going to give you that because it's going to give me the edge. You haven't won yet. So that's going to be interesting, and I think this video has gone long enough. It's just an intro just to say what I'm going to do in this campaign. I think what I will do is I'm going to start by playing each mission out on camera, and we'll see how it goes. Some missions are very quick, 15-20 minutes, not counting the setup, because I'm going to be tuning the deck off camera, and probably also setting up off camera, though I think for each mission what I'll do for the next video is to explain my reasonings behind the setup and then start the mission. So if you think that could be enjoyable, come along for the experience.